on behalf of the City of Burlington, I'm delighted to welcome you to the city, at the City Hall. If I'm not mistaken, I think this is the 5th year that we've done this. Is that correct?
Yes.
Makes me feel old. I've been mayor for 5 years. I've enjoyed this in the past, and what I suggest that we do is I'd like to make just a few brief remarks, tell you my views about the world, which may be somewhat different from what you hear at West Point. And then we can open it up for a dialogue. You ask me questions, and we can go from there, okay? If we have about an hour. Let me start by saying that the major concern that I have as an American citizen and as a mayor centers around two phenomena. Number one, in our own nation today, we are spending, as you know, about $300 billion a year on the military. That's a lot of money. All over the world, the major powers, the not so major powers, are spending close to $800 billion a year on military expenses. Now, that's a sum of money, in truth, that is very hard for any of us to really understand. You know what it costs to buy a hamburger for $2, but we all lose a little bit track of what money is like when we go from the hundreds of millions to the billions. Okay. So what we are talking about now is a world in which approximately $800 billion are being spent for weapons of destruction. Every single year we are spending, the Soviet Union, England, France, China, etc., are spending more and more money in nuclear weaponry, chemical warfare, and so forth and so on. Exactly at the same time as in large sections of the world, people are starving to death. You are familiar with what's going on in Africa, which is the extreme. You're familiar with what's going on in Latin America, where economies are totally falling apart. You are familiar with what's going on in the United States of America, where we have millions of people literally living out in the streets. And while the military budget is ballooning, expanding, our city here in Burlington, and every city and town that you come from, is experiencing many difficulties because federal programs which were designed to aid police departments or fire departments or to rebuild streets, sidewalks, sewers are being cut. So I see the moral problem and the economic problem that this world faces and our country faces is in the absolute need to work as hard as we can, all of us, in all parts of the world, to put an end to the international tensions which exist, to work for international peace, so that we can use the wealth of all the nations in this world to provide a decent standard of living for all the peoples, rather than bankrupting the economies of the United States, the Soviet Union, and so forth and so on. That is the challenge that we face. In addition to that, and this I think will be the main point that I want to make, war, as you all know, and I'm sure you're better students of war and warfare than I am, war has been going on for thousands and thousands of years. It starts off with bows and arrows and sticks and stones, and in World War I they made major advances. They came up with tanks, and then they came up with the airplanes, and now we have the missiles and so forth and so on. The proposition that I tell to you, and I'm absolutely, sadly, but confident in what I'm telling you, is that it cannot go on indefinitely. The fact of the matter is, if people are still people will not, in my view, be making war in 100 years from now. Either the nations of the world will either have solved the problem as to how to deal with differences through rational discussions on tables, behind tables, with give and take and with mutual concessions. Either they will do that or the planet will be destroyed. There's not the slightest doubt in my mind. You cannot continue to produce nuclear weaponry. You cannot allow a situation where nuclear weapons proliferate, go to more and more countries, more and more chance for error, more and more instability on the part of certain leaders, and not believe that someday, sometime, by either accident or design, these missiles will go off and the planet will be destroyed. That's it. Now, I think that war stinks, and I think that war is an irrational aspect of human behavior under any conditions. But the point that I'm making to you is that if the world does not wisen up and wisen up very quickly, the planet will be destroyed. Through no fault of yours and through no fault of mine, modern technology, the ability to destroy, has far outstripped the ability of nations to communicate with each other. That's all. World War I, I'm sure you have studied it. You've seen the horror of days, the battles fought in Europe and France and Germany. Tens of thousands of soldiers, each one lying next to each other, dead. World War II, you know the disaster that took place there. You know the loss that took place in cities. Not only the atom bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but the other bombings. Hundreds of thousands of people killed within a few days. And that's what the reality is. If we don't stop that, unless we take a bold new look at what the causes of war are, how can we communicate with each other? There is nothing wrong with people having different points of view. You don't have to like me. I don't have to like you. You don't have to like the leadership of the Soviet Union. I don't like the leadership of the Soviet Union. They don't like the leadership of the United States. But in the year 1986, after thousands and thousands of years of civilization, is there not a better way to address differences of opinion than going out killing people? Right now, today, in the Soviet Union, there are young men and women just like you, okay, who are being trained to do the same exact thing as you are. They are not any nicer than you. They are not any less nice than you. They have the same problems, the same concerns, the same types of parents as you have. And my strong belief, unless there is communication between the superpowers of the world and all the peoples of the world, we're going to see some horrible things. So I think that's the main message that I want to bring to you today, is that from my perspective, the great challenge that we as a society face is to do away with the institution of warfare. Okay? Okay, let's go. Questions, comments? Yeah.
Sir, you say that from my perspective, it seems like you're saying all we're doing is preparing for war, our big military buildup and stuff like that. But from my point of view, I'm not prepared for war. I'm helping to maintain the peace of everything. And I feel everybody else does not feel like we're going towards a standpoint since the advent of nuclear weapons and stuff like that. We've had relatively world peace in terms of it. How would you take that into account?
Okay. I mean, I think obviously that's the point of view. And I trust that when you understand when I'm making my criticisms of war, this is not a personal criticism of anybody in this room. I think clearly that is what the line that is given of every nation in the world. I have never yet heard, or very, very rarely heard, of any nation which suggests we are arming our young men and women in order to go for war. Every nation. Do you think it's said differently in the Soviet Union? They are protecting themselves against American imperialism and American aggression. We in the United States are protecting ourselves against communist tyranny and communist hegemony. That's what the line is. That's what they say in the Soviet Union. That's what they say in China. Everybody is defending themselves against everybody else. I think what I would argue to you is that has often been the argument that every government has used. And nonetheless, the list of wars, and again, you guys probably know more about it than I do. They keep coming, they keep coming, they keep coming. All kinds of good reasons. Nobody has ever gone to war on either side for anything but the best of reasons. One of the most pathetic pictures, I don't know if you ever see those big picture books, and look through pictures of history. I enjoy doing that very much. And one of the most tragic pictures that I've ever seen in my life was a picture in World War I. You had a German soldier and a French soldier who were opposing each other, lying down. They both stabbed each other, bayoneted each other. They're lying down there, and their helmets are off, okay? And in the helmets of both of these guys who killed each other was for God and for country. Okay? Both of these guys were fighting for their governments, were fighting for God and for country. The main point that I want to make to you is not to tell you that the Soviet Union has the best government in the world, all loving people. They're not. Any more than I'm going to tell you that the United States government is, in my view, the best government in the world. It is not, in my view. The only point that I'm saying is you've got to go beyond that line. I know that that's what you believe, and I'm not questioning your sincerity. But what I would ask you to understand is people throughout the world also believe that. And what I don't want to see is, in the name of peace, this entire world blown up or you getting killed in unnecessary wars. Human beings are smart enough to do better than that. And that's what I would like you to think about. Yeah.
So I was wondering, I think every one of us, every one of the cadets, both from West Point and Norwich, have noble intentions. None of us want to see war. And I think we'd all like to find causes for hunger and for, everything. We'd like to find world peace, we'd like to find a cure to AIDS, and we'd like to see the Patriots win the Super Bowl. But what I have to ask you is how, sir?
Good. And I think it's fair enough to tell you that in my pocket I do not have a blueprint. Nobody does. But I'll tell you what I think. I think for a start, on both sides, not only in this country, but in the Soviet Union and other countries of the world, there has got to be a lessening of the feeling that many of us grew up with. When I was your age, that's what I believed too. We are always right. We are number one. Well, you know what? There are several hundred countries in the world which are also proud of themselves, and they consider themselves number one too. Okay? I think that's the first point. You've got to take a global look. The second point is, how many of you, and I'd like to ask you this, how many of you have ever sat down and talked to somebody from the Soviet Union? Please raise your hand. Okay, I mean, we have made that, and some of you, by any chance, happened to see a very fine television program which was on television recently. What's his name? Who's the talk? Donahue. Did you see the Donahue program in which there was a dialogue with people in the Soviet Union? Okay. The point that I'm making is, I would like you to understand you are being trained to go to war against the people, and they are doing the same thing to you that you've never met. Now, we have, every once a year, it seems, the Soviet Union sends a hockey team around, especially. They keep playing UVM, they keep beating UVM, actually. They're pretty good at hockey. And one of the remarks that was made, not this year, but last year, the Soviet players sit down and they get to meet the UVM players. And UVM guys say, the same age, they're not totally different types of human beings. I have the feeling that you got to know people your own age, some of them you would like, some you would not like. But you would end up finding that as human beings, they are not totally different than you. Their parents are not totally different than you, your parents. So to answer your question, I'll tell you, if we are spending $300 billion on military, what I would do is take maybe 1% of that, okay, and I would send you and several hundred thousand other young Americans to the Soviet Union. I would have the Soviet Union send several hundred thousand young men and women to this country so that we can get to know each other and talk. Because when you talk to somebody, you find out that maybe there are better ways to communicate than killing. You know, one of the things that happened, and one of the interesting things about modern technology, not only should you be doing that, should we be as a nation, and I'm proud that because of a lot of pressure placed on him, President Reagan now at the beginning, there is a growth now, and an attempt at increasing cultural activity and these types of things. Considering that we're spending $300 billion on plans to kill them, I think that both nations should be spending $1 billion in attempting to improve communication. You know what else I would suggest? And your question is a good question. I think we can start off with the assumption that nobody in this room, nobody in West Point, I'm sure many of your teachers have had the experience of war and know the horrors of war better than most of us. Okay? I would suggest and demand that President Reagan and Mr. Gorbachev and the other leaders of the world get in front of worldwide television. One of the nice things about technology now is you can have a program, it can be beamed for the entire world. This did not used to be the case. What I would do is get them in front of the television cameras, lock them in a room, and let them talk to each other. And not let them come out of that room. Let them understand that they cannot come out of that room unless significant strides have been made to increase international communication, to lower military spending, to increase military trust of people. It can be done. And what I'm saying sounds very radical. It is not very radical. Because what I'm telling you, if we don't do those kinds of things, I'm not optimistic about your kids, your children, growing up and living out a normal life. That's the reality. And I think you have got to believe, and some people do not, I do. I believe that all people throughout the world would much prefer to live in peace than in war. There are people in this country who thrive on war, who love war. There are people in the Soviet Union, I'm sure, who do the same. They are a monopoly. Okay? And in a variety of methods, but mostly through international communication, we've got to break down the barriers. Okay, so that's an answer. Yes?
Do you favor unilateral disarmament, and if so, could you explain how you feel that would benefit the peace process?
No, I don't favor unilateral disarmament. But I think by bringing both countries together in front of the entire world, what you can do is move simultaneously together. For example, Mr. Gorbachev has made some good proposals in terms of the limiting of testing of nuclear weapons. They are good proposals. We should take them up and outdo him before the entire world. We can say, we propose to do this for 6 months. For 3 months, we want you to do it. No, I am not suggesting that the United States disarm unilaterally tomorrow. I don't think that would be wise. But I think you can take a step forward, you can have international inspection, see if they take that step forward with you. Yes?
So you mentioned about people sent 100,000 here and 100,000 there. If you look into the Soviet Union culture, they don't want their people seeing how we live here in the United States. So right there you run into a big problem. I mean, us going over there is
point is a good point. I think clearly, within the context of everything that I'm saying, there is no question but that the people of the Soviet Union have a right to hear from Americans. And I think we're beginning to make some progress. As you may recall, I think it was New Year's Day. President Reagan spoke to the people of the Soviet Union, and Gorbachev spoke to the people of the United States. The fact of the matter is that Americans have been on television in the Soviet Union. Your point is well taken. Clearly, if we want them to know what America is and what our views are, we have got to be able to communicate with them. There's no argument about that. You're absolutely right. And that is a demand. And if they say before the entire world that we are not going to allow Americans to communicate with people in the Soviet Union, I think they're going to have a hard problem to defend that before the entire world, because people say, what are you afraid of? Why not? So I think your point is a good point. I am not so certain as you are, though, that if that request were made, and I see breakdowns. In other words, Reagan was on national television in the Soviet Union. Gorbachev appeared here. There was this dialogue recently on the Donahue. I presume they had the equivalent of Phil Donahue of the Soviet Union. I enjoyed that program. There were two town meetings, one in wherever it was, in Leningrad actually, and one in Seattle, Washington. Presumably people will communicate. I think that is beginning to break down in the Soviet Union. That is a demand that we should make on a regular basis. Let the people of the United States communicate with the people of the Soviet Union. You're right. I think that if we come forward, well, I can't say, I don't know what will happen. That's a demand that we should make. Yes?
So you talked about how the Soviets have been making all these proposals in arms control. I agree they have been, but how many times when they make the proposals and stuff like that, it's for things that they already have an advantage over, or they consider, well, they're not even really doing anything, but we are, so limit stuff like that.
I hear you. I mean, we get back to the point. I mean, there are some people who believe that the Soviet Union are devils and liars, and nothing that they say can be trusted.
I'm not saying that at all, because I know they have been making some proposals, and the United States has this tendency sometimes to just not believe it, just based upon our overall feelings that we've been generated since we've been growing up. But it seems like elimination of nuclear weapons by the year 1995 is really how realistic is that?
Well, then what you do...
How safe would it be?
I mean, needless to say, you're not talking to somebody who's a specialist in this area. You raise your question and you sit down with them. And you demand international verification. I mean, you're raising legitimate questions. Clearly, I don't think anything that I'm saying or any sensible person is saying, hey, we trust. They're going to trust us, we're going to trust them, and that's the end of the discussion. You work on these things. What I think your response should be, fantastic. That is our goal, to get rid of nuclear weapons, the reduction of nuclear weapons by 1995. Now, how can we make certain that all the powers in the world are doing it? Let's sit down and talk about it. How can we make certain that you're doing it? How do you make certain that we're doing it? But you say, good, that is a goal that we're shooting for. What is another goal that we're shooting for? Another goal is reduction of both military budgets. Now, that's a hard thing to do. How do you know? I mean, clearly, anybody who knows anything about government budgets knows you can hide money all over the place. They're capable of hiding it. We're capable of hiding it. How do you make certain that that will happen? It's, again, difficult. But what I'm saying is I think we should mutually agree on the goal, mutually agree on verification, and go forward. I have to repeat again. You can give me many, many reasons why we shouldn't do these things. But I don't know that you're off or that you want to. You can give them to me. President Reagan were here, he would give them to me. But what I am saying to you is if we don't begin to move boldly, there is a very good chance that your children will not grow up to live a normal life. And that is a damn good reason to stop the conventional thinking that has gone on for hundreds and hundreds of years. Yes?
Sir, if you had a wand and you could make any change in institutional government today, what change would that be?
What do you mean by institutional government?
Say the federal government, sir, down in D.C. Any major change in...
Okay, I'll tell you what. Let me hold on to that one. Okay? What I would like to do is stay on this theme of war and peace for a moment, and when we're through with that one, let's get to the... I know that you're here primarily also to look at governments and how governments function, and I want to get to that. But let me stay on war and peace, and we'll get to you in a minute, okay? Yes? I'm sorry.
Right now, sir, we're really concentrating on two superpowers,
Yeah.
the United States and Russia. Well, what exactly do you feel would happen if the United States and Russia did decide to suddenly start disarming certain missile and nuclear weapons,
Yeah.
stuff like that? Maybe a second or a third world nation that upon it decides that they have a chance of being one of the superpowers,
Yeah.
so all of a sudden they start.
Okay. I think that's a good question, because we know that the problem goes beyond the United States and the Soviet Union. But I think what we can also say is that the United States and the Soviet Union are the two major superpowers. I think that the influence and the impact that those two nations can have on their own allies can be enormous. I don't think that there's any simple solution to anything, and I'm not suggesting that. that I think there's no question that if the United States and the Soviet Union move forward boldly, England, France, China, third world countries that are getting involved in these things would respond. You know what you can hold out? It seems to me, and I trust that you've studied it, I was to Nicaragua this summer. It was the first time in my life that I've ever been to a third world country. And Nicaragua happens not to be one of the poorest third world countries. It's poor. There are many poor. It is astounding. How many of you, have any of you had the privilege to go to third world countries by any chance? It is astounding. It is astounding to see the poverty that you see. I mean, it is unbelievable. You go to a country like Haiti, you're going, well, I mean, it's almost beyond comprehension how people are living. And I think what we say to the third world countries is, you know what? Instead of spending this money on nuclear weaponry, which everybody in the world hopes will never be used, we are going to be working with you on programs to lift your standard of living. That's your move, to get involved in this process. That's what you can gain by putting down your guns. All over the third world, too. I mean, the fact that the United States, our economy is suffering because of our spending on military. Same thing in the Soviet Union. Let me tell you something. The people in the Soviet Union have many, many economic problems. There's an appeal on their part to put their money into agriculture. In the third world, there are countries that are spending incredible sums of money on military when their own people are hungry. Now, I am not suggesting to you for one moment that there is a simple solution, that it's going to happen overnight. What I am suggesting to you is that we have got to change our thinking. It is no longer good enough to say, hey, war's going on for a few hundred years, that's the way it's always been, we're going to continue that process. I beg of you not to think that way, to be open-minded about looking at alternatives. Yes?
Our job as professional future officers, it's our job to prepare for future battles, whereas it's the government's position to attempt to prevent us from going into it. And I was just wondering what you're doing now or what you intend to do in the future about this problem, granted that you're limited to what you can do.
That's a good question, and I understand that, except that you are citizens of the United States who vote, you don't make the policy, right? Somebody tells you where to go, and it's told that you'll go. And that's clear, and I understand that. That is what your obligation is. What I do as one mayor, now, as you know, a mayor does not determine the military spending. But I do my very best within the context of the city, within the state, and in my relationship to our congressional delegation to express the point of view, which I think is reflected, by the way, by many people in the city of Burlington and in the state of Vermont. We reflect that view that the United States has got to be very bold, along with the Soviet Union, in seeking peace initiatives. So we play a role. We, for example, have issues on our ballot that we ask the people of Burlington to vote on, which very often express something close to the view that I am espousing to you today. The state of Vermont, as you may or may not know, was very active in the nuclear arms freeze issue, where essentially we were saying that we want Congress not to be producing more nuclear weapons. Other questions on the war? I'd be happy to get. I know that there's a whole other area that some of you would like to discuss, but I'd be happy to. Yeah.
In terms of political participation, it seems when there isn't much movement, we'll have popular movements like the nuclear freeze, but anytime there's some sort of accommodation, even if it's speaking, the public participation is very limited, and as a result, there's no momentum. So, can you comment on that and your role as a participant?
Yeah, I think you're quite right. It's my belief, and I think if you put this thing on the ballot, okay, if we could put into one paragraph everything that I've told you, I think and give the American people a chance to vote on it, I think they would overwhelmingly vote for it. The problem is, what happens is that for a number of reasons, these issues are not discussed within the ranks of the people. Now, for example, I am often criticized here in the city of Burlington because we raise these issues. Right here, you're looking at the city council room. And there are some people who are conservative and say, why are you talking about international issues? Let's worry about the fire department and the police department. That's what you should be concentrating on. We try to counter just that point by getting the people involved, okay, in a variety of ways. Right now, for example, in the city of Burlington, we have a sister city program with a town called Puerto Cabezas in Nicaragua. Some of us, including myself, are very much opposed to what the United States is doing in Nicaragua. We don't think that the United States has the right to destroy the government of Nicaragua because the president and some people in Congress don't like that government. We don't think that any superpower in the world has the right to overthrow governments. We don't think the Soviet Union has the right to destroy the government of Afghanistan. And we are attempting to relate to the people of Nicaragua and say to them, not everybody in the United States feels that our government has the right to do that. And we are trying to send them medical help, which they desperately need, educational material, which they desperately need. So that's one way that we're trying to relate to a third world nation. Yes.
I was wondering what the name of your sister city was in Afghanistan, sir.
What the name of our sister city
Do you have one
program
in
is?
Afghanistan?
No, we do not have it. We are very much opposed for exactly that point. You see, we are Americans, and what we can do best is try to control American policy. We can condemn the policy of the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, and we can do it honorably because we say that it is very hard to defend the situation where the United States says, I don't like the government of Nicaragua, I'm going to destroy it. Well, if you say that and you think that that's an acceptable policy, then the leaders of the Soviet Union could say, we don't like the government of Afghanistan, we're going to destroy it. And then it's hypocritical to say, we condemn what they're doing in Afghanistan, but we have the right to do it in Nicaragua. I think, that both of those policies are wrong. And I think that to have respect around the world, at least intellectual respect, you have got to be consistent. You can't say the United States has the right to do this, but the Soviet Union does not. Yes?
But sir, in the same idea, don't you think that it's better to work within the system? I mean, aren't you overstepping the boundaries a little bit? We're talking about a nation dealing with another nation. You're talking about your city going down there.
No, our city is not going down there. Yeah.
The support that you're giving, sir, it isn't a duty of yours to support the ideas of this country and not overstep, just like
That's
Jackson West Virginia.
good question. Okay, that is a very good question. Did everyone hear the question? Okay, and I want to deal with that question because it's an important question. What is my duty as an American citizen? If the President of the United States does something that I believe is wrong, if the Congress does something that I believe is wrong, you know what my patriotic duty is? To speak out as loudly as I can to oppose that policy. That's what the United States is about. One of the concerns that all of us have about authoritarian government of the Soviet Union. Government says, hey, invading Afghanistan is the right thing to do, and I don't want to hear anybody in our country say that invading Afghanistan is wrong. You're un-Russian if you do that. Okay? So I think that when the American policy is wrong, we should speak out against it in a legal manner, or civil disobedience if we want to pay that penalty. So I think that it is totally right and proper, and that's what makes this country a fine country, that we can do that. Okay? I don't think, and I want to deal with this point because it's an important point. Okay, I'll get to you in a second. Okay? We do not live in a dictatorship, and when you're wearing a uniform and you swear allegiance to fight for freedom, you have to talk about what freedom is. You know what freedom mostly is? Freedom mostly is to defend views that are in minority, that may in fact even be abhorrent, may be a view that nobody, including me, nobody in this room will agree with. It's a really off-the-wall point of view. And you know what? We're going to defend that right. Because it's important that people have the right to think and develop ideas. In terms of foreign policy, the majority of Americans, by the way, if you read the polls, certainly do not agree with President Reagan on this. You do poll after poll after poll, when people ask, should the United States spend money to destroy the government of Nicaragua, the overwhelming majority of the people say no. The president is not listening to the people. I think that's an immoral policy. And again, what I would like to see when we raise the question, how can we bring international peace? You know what I would love? The truth of the matter is the Nicaraguan government would welcome if you took your uniforms off. You to go down there and tour the country, free, go any place you want. Send an equal number of kids from the Nicaraguan army to this country. They'd be up for doing it tomorrow. I'm afraid the president would not. You know why? Because the president does not want you to know what's going on in Nicaragua. But the point is, to get back to your question, a very, very important point. There was a saying many years ago, my country, right or wrong. That's not what America is about. That is not what America is about. Just because somebody, now I'm the mayor of the city of Burlington, just because I say something, I don't want or expect everybody in the city of Burlington to say, hey, the mayor said it, must be right. In fact, we spend a lot of time to try to develop discussion. I'd rather have somebody, one of you, come up and say, you're absolutely wrong. This is why you're wrong. That's what I want. I don't want to say everyone leave this room saying, God, Mayor Sanders is right on everything. That's the end of the discussion. Any more than I want you to say, hey, President Reagan said it, it must be true. Read it in my newspaper, it must be true. Think for yourself. Well, let me get to the, yes.
So have you been in the military?
name? Everyone hear what Merritt said? Merritt said, which is true, millions and millions of Americans are working in the defense economy, right? What would happen if we dissolved? What would happen? Now I'm going a little further than Merritt's question. But what would happen if, God forbid, there were world peace? Would there be mass unemployment? I'm stretching your question. Forgive me. Okay. The point is, your question was, we have a lot of people working within the defense industry. What would happen to these workers? Is that your question?
In a way, I'm just saying there's more to it.
Yes.
What you're saying.
That's a good question.
Manager socialist, but the majority of the United States, probably 99.99% are not. And we are not set up to live in that type of government. And
What type of government?
now,
Right.
in a socialist type government.
Who is talking about a socialist type
I'm
government?
saying that if we lose these type jobs,
Yeah.
the federal government is going to have to do something.
Yes?
And I know, well, my opinion is the government will not be able to handle it.
Okay. You will forgive, everyone has heard Merritt's question. What I will do with your permission is stretch it and carry it to what we politicians call its logical conclusion. Okay, you'll forgive me. What Merritt is basically saying, as I understand it, and you can jump up and down if you think I'm misstating your point of view, is that we have millions of workers involved in the defense industry, which is absolutely correct. That if tomorrow we closed down every defense installation in this country, there would be massive unemployment, disruption of the economy. That's true. But let me carry you, now you'll forgive me, I'm going to carry you to your logical conclusion. What Merritt is saying, I want you to think about this, at least what I think, is we have got to continue preparing for war because of economic necessities. That in point of fact, this nation cannot afford international peace because there would be radical economic dislocation. Now, in truth, let me go back a little bit in history here. And Merritt, I'll give you a chance to respond if you want. Some of you who have studied American history know what during the 30s, there was a terrible depression in this country. You're familiar with that. Unemployment, 25, 30%. The truth of the matter is that unemployment began to be dealt with effectively when the United States began preparing for World War II. Produced airplanes, tanks, and so forth and so on. The question that we have to deal with, very basic question, I'm glad you raised that issue. Is it possible, not only in the United States, but in the Soviet Union, other countries, who also have millions of workers involved in defense production, is it possible to run economies without producing weapons of destruction? That's really what the issue is. If it's not, if somebody comes here and says, you're going to have massive depression in the United States of America, if God forbid, peace comes to this earth, then there's something very, very wrong with our economic system, because we're moving in two contradictory patterns. Now, I happen not to think that you will have massive economic dislocation if the government does the right thing. For example, God knows the amount of products, the amount of goods and services that are needed not only in this country, but throughout the world, that can be created if we were not spending our energy building nuclear weapons. In the state of Vermont, in many of the areas that you come from, there's a massive problem regarding affordable housing. Okay? In Vermont, many young families just cannot afford the cost of housing. We could put millions of workers to work in construction and allied areas producing housing. Our cities, if some of you come from large cities, I do not have to tell you that the infrastructure of your cities are falling apart. Sewer systems, mass transit. You've been on a New York City subway lately? Okay, mass transit. Dozens of other areas in absolute need of work. In the third world, people are starving to death. They are of need of the goods and services. We need affordable health care. We need a dozen different things desperately in this country, and we've got to do that. And we can do that by transferring the sums of money that we're now spending on the military to other areas. I think there is more, if your point is, should we just continue to produce military hardware to keep people at work? The answer is no, I don't think we should. But I think there is more than enough work to go around in this country. In fact, study after study shows that money spent in peace-related activity ends up employing more people than money spent on war-related activity. But I do want you to think about that argument, because if the bottom line is, and it's not often said, that we really need to spend hundreds of billions on the military to protect the economy, then that's a very sad statement, because I think everybody recognizes that our goal should be international peace. Merritt, let me get back to you.
It's interesting, but it's pretty inaccurate to what I was trying to say.
Okay, then you say what you want to say.
What I'm trying to say is, no, we don't have war because we have the industry. What I'm saying is, President Reagan is not a gun-toting Rambo type that's just going out. What I'm saying is, there are more factors that are influencing his decision, which is mainly Congress. All right. There's no way a congressman, if he expects to stay a congressman, is going to go ahead and kill jobs. Now, Vermont, for instance, it's easy for you to have your Rainbow Coalition or whatever you want to say, because you really are kind of isolated from that type of world. And you don't have the problems with the military, with that much military production, and you're mostly a rural area, like the area I came from. We are not that involved in the military. What I'm saying is, the majority of the congressmen that are influencing federal action are interested in keeping those jobs, and they are the ones that influence national policy.
You're right.
And what I'm saying is, you've got to think more than just your piece.
You're right. I mean, if your point is that you take Congressman Jones, who comes from a district where there's a lot of military spending and a lot of jobs, is he going to jump up and say, hey, let's close down this plant tomorrow? And the answer is he's not. And that's correct. And there are a lot of congressmen like that. And I think what the answer is that the government, and in my statement, I was not just blaming President Reagan, by the way. It's a congressional problem as well. And I think the point is that what the president can say and must say to Congressman Jones is, hey, we are going to protect your workers, and this is how we're going to do it. There is work for your people in areas other than the military. That's the point. But you're quite right. Certainly there's a lot of pressure against closing of military installations, if you like, because of the loss of jobs. And I think clearly the government is going to have to make certain.
Our prayers will need to get there. So in fact, because of wild men like Colonel Gaddafi, so in fact I would say that our war production is necessary for our economy. We would not be able to trade with half the world. Mainly because they just, their opinion of us, their Islamic religion. Most of our $300 billion for defense is not in nuclear weapons, it's for conventional warfare to protect our economic system.
I mean, I would just repeat that I don't think that the goals that I'm establishing are going to be set overnight with a particular issue. How do you deal with the issue of international terrorism? It's not an easy. Pardon me? Well, it's not an easy answer. All right. How do you deal with people like Gaddafi? Not an easy answer. But I think there are ways that you can deal with it. What I ask of you not is to just come back to me and tell me, gee, it ain't easy. We have a Gaddafi in the world, therefore we've got to spend more and more money on the military, and there is no other alternative. There will always be, probably, Gaddafis of the... Let me rephrase it. In the Soviet Union now, if this discussion were taking place, somebody would say, you are asking us in the Soviet Union to reduce our military weaponry at exactly the same time the United States is destroying, in a terribly aggressive way, Nicaragua. We can't trust those people. Seems to be people saying that. What I'm suggesting is not that terrorism, for example, is a very difficult problem, I think. But what I don't want you to just think, because there are problems out there, that we can't radically rethink our national policy. Yeah.
Shelley, hear your point of view on how to deal with terrorism. What do you think is a way to deal with it without destroying our own democratic ideology?
Right. I think for a start, that the ability to deal with, well, first of all, we almost have to define terrorism before we get on. Terrorism, I think we all acknowledge, we all understand. We can define terrorism as somebody, some lunatic putting a bomb someplace and innocent people getting killed, right? That's horrendous. There's nobody, I suspect, in this room who will not agree that that's true. Terrorism, I think we can all agree, has something to do with governments pegging other governmental leaders for assassination. What do you think? Is that a fair form? Would you believe it's terrorism if government X said, we're going to send somebody out to kill the leader of another government? What do you think? Is that terrorism? Who would raise your hand if that is a form of terrorism? Or is that acceptable governmental policy? Who thinks it's acceptable governmental policy? Okay. Well, most people I detect think that it's not. Some think that it is. Okay. There are many people who would argue that it is. I would argue that it is. I think one of the problems that you have, and I get back to a point that I made maybe a half hour ago, that I think we can change the tone in the world if the superpowers came together. Because then they say, then the Soviet Union says to Gaddafi, the United States says to the Contras in Nicaragua, who in my view are acting in terrorist ways, stop it. It's no longer acceptable. If you start bombing and destroying innocent people, you're not going to get any support from us. You can forget about that. Now, obviously, the United States and the Soviet Union alone cannot and do not control every other country in the world. But the superpowers acting in a concerted manner that says terrorism is an unacceptable form of behavior. No more. Look at it. You got billions of people in this earth, and there could be some lunatic walking around with a bomb and wreak havoc. I don't know that you can control every act. I mean, I don't know. I think the best thing that can be done, in my view, is that for the leaders of the world to say terrorism is unacceptable, to control terrorism on their own part. We are right now funding terrorism, in my view. Soviet Union is funding terrorism. Put a national stop to it. Put extreme pressure on any ally who is engaging on that. When you have a country, a world of billions of people, I think you cannot stop every lunatic every time. But I think that that's, for a start, the best way that you can go. Yes?
I don't know how much time we planned for you, but let me raise some things you can deal with now.
Sure. We are running out of time. Yeah.
Vermont, before the Civil War, blatantly and openly and hostilely violated the U.S. Constitution, the law of the United States, in a kind of sanctuary movement for freed Negroes. What is your feeling about the sanctuary movement? That might make a good transition in Burlington today. 2, are you running for governor? 3, is Burlington ever going to get a waterfront project, and how? And 4, what do you think about the current distribution of power between Republicans and Democrats in the state? Take your pick.
Good questions. Go back. I'm on 4. Go back to 1.
Sanctuary.
Burlington is not a sanctuary city. That issue was raised before the Board of Aldermen. It was not, that's my memory, voted in. I think it was, the resolution ended up being watered down. We have a church in the city which is supporting several Guatemalans. The city itself did not vote itself to be a sanctuary city. I think the issue of sanctuary, if you want my view, what it says, what it attempts to say, and to point out that in Latin America today especially, there are many countries such as Guatemala and El Salvador, where there are people who, if they stay in that country, will get killed by their governments. And again, we don't have the time to get into the whole issue of Latin American politics, and I don't want to do it. The feeling is that we should welcome those people who, if they return to their own country, would be killed. And that's a sign of sympathy for those people. Right, that's what Sanctuary of Burlington is not. We are supporting a church, which is. We have several Guatemalan families here, which is, I understand that if they return to their own country, they would be in a lot of trouble. In terms of political power, you are sitting in a city, by the way, you may not know it, but you are sitting in a city which has some historic relevance in this country today, and that you're in the only city in the United States of America which has 3 political parties that are active. All over America, where there are partisan elections, as we have here in Burlington, you have either Democrats or Republicans in office. In Burlington, I am an independent mayor affiliated with a group called the Progressive Coalition, which is third party. We have, of the 13 aldermen, 6 progressives, 5 Republicans, and 2 Democrats. And that makes the city somewhat unique. My own feeling, to answer your question, is that on the national level and on the statewide level, there needs to be a break away from the Democratic and Republican parties. My feeling is that, by and large, both the Democratic and Republican parties end up representing what I call the ruling class. A small number of people in this country with tremendous wealth, who sit at the heads of giant banks and corporations, who have more wealth and more power than you can begin to understand. They control political parties. They own the corporations who decide whether or not they'll stay in the community or not. They can buy and sell political leaders. It costs a lot of money to run for office. And very often political leaders go to those wealthy people for their help. My own feeling is that we need a new party in this country made up of working people, poor people, minority people, women, people who are not getting a fair shake in the present economy. People, in fact, who constitute the vast majority of our population. A great concern that I have, and that you should have, is that in national elections, almost half the people in this country don't even bother to vote because they feel the government doesn't represent their interests. So, in terms of political power, my hope is that we would develop a national third party. Okay, let me get to You raised the question, we don't have a whole lot of time, and I know that
We don't have to, we have until at least 2:15 if you have that.
I don't have quite that much. I can say a little bit after 2, yes.
Sir, you talked about how you fund, and I'm not really too sure kind of what the, this is kind of a two-part question, so I'm getting this first part, then I can get to the other part, about giving money or aid, was it to Afghanistan, what was that now?
No, I said that we have a sister city program with a city in Nicaragua.
Now, how much does that cost the city of Burlington?
$0.
Fund something like that?
Zero.
It costs you zero to
Yeah,
fund it?
it is funded, and the donations come privately, all privately. There's no city money that's allowed.
Okay, so now we're looking at this money that's coming into the city, and the city happens to be sending it to where now?
No, I think you misunderstood my point. I said that the city treasury itself, taxpayers' dollars, do not go, $0 go into this program.
Okay, so where does this money come from?
Privately. If you would like to make a donation to it, that's where it would go.
The money comes privately, the people just say, okay, I'm gonna donate, so we get some money.
Exactly.
Now, you as the mayor have your eyes sure there are people in Burlington here who must not be eating. Some people might be starving, okay, I come
Well,
from
starving is a little bit
city,
strong, but
and I see it all the
Yeah,
time, when I work at the
right.
police, and I see people starving all the time. Now, these people are making this donation to, some other country, and you went to Nicaragua, it seeks poverty, now you wanna help them over there, but I think what's happening is now, we're losing the concept is, now here I am the mayor, I should come back to here, maybe walk around some of the streets here, and see it happen here in my own city, but now I'm having people's donations, so-called, sent somewhere else, but now, why can't I have those donations sent here for my own people?
Now, the answer is that's exactly what we do. The answer is that since I have been mayor, we have done our very, very best in terms of directing public funds. We run, for example, in the city, well, there are 2 emergency shelters. There was a time in this city, like in many cities in America, that people were sleeping out on the streets. And when the weather gets 20 below zero, that is not a healthy thing for you to do. We have established, one was a religiously established shelter. Another one was established by a nonprofit group with the help of the city, and public money goes into it to keep people off the street. We fund as best we can all the programs. One of the concerns that we have is just the point you raised. A lot of poverty in Vermont. We are doing our best to put public and private money into fighting poverty. That does not mean that it is wrong to suggest that the policy of the United States toward Nicaragua is wrong. It does not suggest that. I think you can move simultaneously in both areas. In fact, one of the concerns that we have is that the President of the United States, who himself is cutting off to the tunes of billions of dollars programs for poor people, is now spending money to destroy the people of Nicaragua. That's where the problem, in my view, lies.
The problem is we're too busy looking at feeding other countries and other worlds, like feed Africa. Now, these people who do this aren't going into the cities and looking at the people we can't even feed ourselves. I think in order to get into other countries to help them out, you first got to deal with your own problems. So if you're not dealing with your own problem and taking care of that problem, then how can you go and say, well, I want to come here and I want to help you, I want to do farms for you, I want to feed you people, I want to help you, I want you to grow farms, and they're going to say to you, well, you can't do it in your own country, so just pick up out of here and go do somewhere else.
I mean, you're presenting a point of view, which you'll forgive me, it's what is roughly called an isolationist point of view, which says, let's not worry about the rest of the world, let's concentrate on what's happening in the United States. There are people who agree with that point of view. I think you cannot turn your back on the fact that millions of people are starving to death around the world. That does not mean that you ignore the problems in your own country. And one of the concerns, again, that I reiterate, is that we are spending tremendous sums of money unnecessarily while we are not either helping the people in our own country or the people abroad. What I would like to do now, maybe let's take one more question on the international scene. I would like to go into the more mundane, somewhat more boring issue of local government and state government. Yeah.
Okay, this will be very brief. I'm mostly interested in your strategy for U.S.-USSR negotiations, what you were talking about, and mainly on incentives, especially on the Soviet side, for the Soviet counterparts, their incentives to want to come into these types of negotiations. And my question centers on, do you think the recent Gorbachev type of proposals that even Reagan has admitted are very, very positive, interesting, would they have come about, honestly, in your opinion, without Reagan's military buildup, without this like Star Wars initiative, in your own opinion...
Good question, yeah. I mean, I think what President Reagan would say, see, we have finally scared them enough, and now they're going to come to the table and talk.
What do you think?
I don't. I really don't.
You think that the same proposals would have come or maybe come...
Well, I think also it's important to know that Gorbachev is not his predecessor. So we can't say whether his predecessor would have come forth with the same proposal. I mean, the answer is nobody knows the answer to your question. What can we do? I think, I mean, all that I can give you is my own view. My own view is that the way to world peace is not spending more and more money on what I think, in terms of Star Wars, rather absurd programs. I think that to be successful, I think the president should get up there and say, Mr. Gorbachev, we have a proposal. We're going to send 100,000 young Americans to your country. You tell us whether you have the courage to send those kids, your kids in this country to learn about this nation today. Tell the whole world. We want, this young man raised the question before, I want to go on television. I want kids from West Point on Soviet television. You come on our television. Anything you're afraid of? You have any problem with that? Sounds fair to me. What are you going to do? For the whole world. Do it before the United Nations. Challenge them. Challenge them to be open. You go 50 yards, let them go 50 yards. If they don't go 50 yards, the world is watching them. Then you put the finger on them.
Because they use rhetoric or something else in order
Sure they can. I mean, hey, politicians can argue 8 sides of the issue. But I think it's not difficult. You make, I mean, in a sense, that's what Gorbachev is doing. He's coming forward with, to the world, seems like a reasonably simple proposal, and everyone's going to watch and see how the United States responds. I think the United States should come forward. I would propose it. Send 100,000 kids to the Soviet Union. Not very complicated. Go for 6 months in the Soviet Union. Would you? How many people would like to go? Fantastic. I think that that's exciting, and I think we get exactly the same response from kids your age in the Soviet Union. Before they want to kill you. Wow, but let me tell you something. You know that right now, in the city of Burlington, Vermont, as a result of State Department regulation, we are not allowed to have Soviet journalists or businessmen come to the city of Burlington by U.S. State Department code. There's a certain section of our country in which Soviet representatives in the Soviet government are not allowed to come, just as is the case in the Soviet Union. The point that I'm making is everybody in this room can tell me how bad the Soviet Union is, and I don't want to argue with you on each of these points. I'm not here to tell you that they are perfect, wonderful people and that all the problems are caused by the United States. You didn't hear me say that. What I'm saying is, if they will not allow 30 Soviet soldiers to come to the United States, there's a damn problem. And I think what we should do is point that out. Get on the offensive. You say, why don't you as a class? Now, I don't know how you relate to the United States. Write to them. Write to your counterparts in the Soviet Union and say, we're prepared to go over there. West Point, we're willing to invite you here. Meet them. Before you kill them, say hello to them. Learn Russian. Let them learn English. Okay? It can't hurt. The basic cause of war is ignorance. They build up stories. Every country tells the people in its own country how terrible and horrible and ugly their enemy is. Read the history of every country. That's what they say. Terrible, horrible people. And they go out and they kill each other. And what I'm suggesting to you is meet these people, demand to meet them. If they back down, if they are afraid, if they don't want you to come there, expose that before the world, say, why not? What are you afraid of? Fine, but they do it. The point that I'm making on international diplomacy is not easy. All right, and if they reject it, they could probably say 10 different times, we have made these offers to the United States, they have rejected those offers too. What I would like to do is, because we don't have a whole lot of time, maybe get to the more mundane issue of local government. Let me go back to was your question? You asked, please ask it again.
Sir, what I asked was, if you could make any change, and you might as well go to government here in Vermont, what would it be?
Okay, I don't know, but I'll tell you what I see the problems are, and I don't know easy solutions. The basic problem that we have, not only in Vermont, but all over the country, is that people are losing confidence in government to respond to their needs. Okay, there's a problem out there, and people say, I'm hurting, I don't have a home, I can't afford my rent, I can't afford the electric bill, I can't afford the telephone bill, I can't afford the cost of medicine, okay? I need help. And they don't see the government responding. They see politicians coming forward, vote for me, vote for me. Nothing happens to deal with their problems. The goal that we have got to shoot for is to have people feel that the government is them. They are the government. If I vote for you and you're elected and you don't do a good job, I'm going to unelect you and I'm going to vote for him. The distance between government and the people in this country is very far. The major tragedy, the manifestation of that, is half the people don't vote. That is a very serious problem. Half the people do not vote, and large numbers of the people who do vote are heavily influenced by silly political 30-second ads. Okay? People do not understand or believe that the government responds or can respond to their question. One of the things that I'm very proud of in this city is that the last 5 years we've doubled the voter turnout. Twice as many people now vote in local elections as used to vote. That's very important. So to answer your question, in one way or another, we have got to involve the people more in the democratic process. From the grassroots, their demands have got to be heard by government. They have got to become the government. They have got to run for office. Very serious problem. Do you know how much money it takes to run for the United States Senate or for the governorship of a large state? Who wants to make a guess? $1 million. Give me a break.
Depends if you're running in North Carolina.
Precisely. Okay? Obviously, in a small state like Vermont, it is different than it is a large state like New York. But in a large state, $1 million might get you for the first few weeks of the primary. You may recall in New York State, a guy like Lehrman ran. Remember that he ran against Como? Remember that? Well, this guy happened to be a rich guy. He took out his checkbook. He said, well, I think I'd like to be governor of the state of New York. Wrote him, I think, a check for $10 million, and he ran for governor. So it's pretty easy. Any of you want to run for governor, just take out a check for $10 million, and you're off and running. Those of us who don't have $10 million or $1 million have a somewhat more difficult time. Preferably people who have not yet spoken at all. Yes.
You allude to running for governor. Are you planning on running for governor? If you do, what would be your top priority?
Well, I have not yet made a decision as to whether or not to run. I'm giving serious thought to it. The issues that would be of concern to me would be the tax structure in the state of Vermont. I regard the property tax as a very regressive form of taxation on which to base our educational system or municipal services. So we want radical reform. We believe in the state of Vermont through a variety of ways. Progressive taxation. Do you know what progressive taxation is? How many here, raise your hand, if I use the phrase progressive taxation, how many people in this room know what I'm talking about? Progressive taxation means that you raise revenue from those you tax, those individuals and institutions who can best afford to pay. In other words, if you deal with a poor person who's hanging in, trying to stay alive, you don't go to that person and say, give me more tax dollars for education, when across the street you have a large corporation which is making billions of dollars in profit, which is owned by very wealthy people, which is paying $0 in tax. Under President Reagan, for example, rich people and corporations are now paying far less than they used to, and poor people, in many instances, are paying more than they used to. That's called regressivity. When you ask poor people and working people to pay more and rich people to pay less, that's regressive. I believe in progressive taxation. So I say reforming the tax system, dealing with the very high cost of health care, dealing with high utility rates, and basically dealing with the issues of war and peace that I've discussed with you today would be some of the issues that I would campaign on if I were governor. Once again, people who have not yet spoken. Yes.
Yesterday, we had a panel with the Governor of the It was brought up that this undecided line that you're putting up as far as your participation in the race for governor might change in the next few months because you receive certain things that you want to convert from the state legislature from the governor. And,
Did Peter Smith say that?
could you comment on that?
I am the mayor of the city of Burlington. And this city is being, in a wide variety of ways, you're touching on a very sensitive issue here, so I won't get into it, being treated very unfairly by the state. We feel in terms of state aid to education, we're getting a very raw deal. In terms of our ability to develop initiatives to raise revenue in a progressive manner, we're getting a very raw deal. We have been making many demands on Montpelier, which up until this point have fallen on deaf ears. What I have said is that as we watch the legislative session, if the issues that I and other people have been articulating are dealt with, for example, if you're a politician and you're standing up for an issue, and suddenly the opposition steals your issue and runs with it, you understand what I mean? Then you don't have the ability to articulate that issue is much less because your opposition says, hey, this is what Sanders is talking about, property tax reform, we've done it. And I say, no. So it makes the potential for a candidacy that less, the likelihood of success that much less. But I have to tell you, I don't think they're going to deal with our issues. So that's I think the issues that we've raised, I have not seen a tendency yet on the governor's part or on the leadership of the legislature to deal with it. But That's a decision I'll be making when I'll be making it. Let me again, people who have not yet asked questions. Yes.
Earlier today, we were among Peter asked the governor how she would deal with poverty, in your state. She said mainly through education. That would be her main means. I'd like to hear how you'd like to deal with it.
Oh, you guys are asking me. You're asking me loaded questions here. You see. And I really don't want to use this. The governor and I disagree on many, many issues, and I don't want to use this as a forum to attack the governor. That would not be appropriate. I think it's fair to say, though, that while everybody recognizes the importance of education, and one of the concerns that we have is that the governor of the state of Vermont is not treating the city of Burlington and many other cities fairly in terms of state aid to education. Our kids are not getting a fair shake because of the governor's support for a certain formula. And there's no question of the importance of education. But education itself does not help somebody who does not have a job, who can't pay for a phone, who can't afford their health care. You've got to deal with poverty through economic development. You've got to deal with poverty through a variety of ways. Education is certainly an important part of it, not the only part. But don't ask me, I don't really want to, it would not be appropriate for me to attack the government. Yeah.
Sir, I've read in the papers where there seems to be a growing drug problem throughout Vermont, including in Burlington. What do you plan on doing about that? Do you have any plans?
I don't have statistics in front of me to tell you that there is or is not a growing drug problem. There's a drug problem in Vermont. There is a drug problem in every state in the union. And in fact, we are investigating and looking at drug education programs. But if you allow me, I mean, it is a serious problem. Certainly, as you know, crime is often related to the use of drugs. People steal in order to feed their habit. But let me shift it and ask you a question, all right? Now, you've been asking me all these questions. In the state of Vermont, and in fact, in the state of New York, the drinking age was raised from 18 to 21. Now, I know young men and women in the military don't imbibe at all. That is not an interest of yours. But, just kidding, that was a joke. How do you feel about, let's assume, let's not get into this, that we all believe that drunk driving is a very serious problem, right? And I trust that all of you are smart enough to know that if somebody is drunk, you don't put them behind the wheel of a car. I trust we don't have to elaborate on that point. And that it is a serious problem. Do you think that preventing or attempting to prevent people from 18 to 21 from drinking is either fair or an appropriate response to the problem? Young men, yeah. I agree. I mean, I should tell you, there is now a very, emotional debate that's taking place in Vermont right now. And in fact, the legislature of Vermont will be dealing with this issue within the next couple of weeks. And the Senate is it's about equal number going one way or the other. The governor feels that that is an effective approach. I don't. And I'll tell you why for several reasons. First of all, in terms of the fairness of the issue, if somebody who is drinking behind and is drunk and is 50 years of age, that person has got to be dealt with severely. Should somebody who is 19 or 20 be treated as somebody different than 50? In other words, you have a problem. I think what fairness indicates is you deal with that problem across the board. That's number one. Number two, you are soldiers. You are potential soldiers. At the age of 19 or 20, if not you, your friends can go out and get killed for this country. You vote for President of the United States. If we have given you the responsibility to carry a gun, to kill and get killed, if we've given you a responsibility to elect the President of the United States, do you have the responsibility and intelligence to drink a bottle of beer or a glass of wine with dinner? And the third point is, in terms of dealing with the problem of drunk driving, I think that what you're talking about is harsh penalties against anybody, if they're 90 years of age or if they're 18 years of age, who drinks and drives. Harsh and consistent policies. You can kill somebody behind the wheel of a car if you're drunk when you're 22, just as easily as 18. If you're 80 and if you're 18. But I am concerned that a young group, in this case 18 to 21, in a sense being picked on for political reasons. There is a problem, drunk driving. And somebody is saying, well, we know the solution. I'm not so sure it's the solution. Other comments on that issue? Yes.
So this might be a little off track a little, since we're talking about drinking and driving. You know what it felt like to be, you get the raw deal, and how you're talking like that, they're about going
Yeah.
you get the raw deal. Well, we run into a problem, we don't really have that problem getting pulled over for drunk driving. Due to the fact is that we as cadets can't get in the bars around here to get the alcohol to go for drunk driving. Due to the fact that we go to Norwich University and we're cadets, and when we go to a nightclub here or a bar and say, I'd like to get in, and they say, well, you go to Norwich, and you say, yes, we do. Oh, well, you can't come in this establishment due to the fact you go to Norwich. And if you go, I know some of the cadets here have also had the same problem here last year, so I don't know if that's worked
Well, I'll
out.
tell you what we do about that one.
And this has been happening before. I've been here for 4 years, and I've been subject to. I worked up here, even though during my time off, and I spent a lot of time up here. And even during the summer months, I was still not allowed in here. And for 4 years now, we've been alienated.
Well, why don't you come into my office? Okay? I think that that's totally wrong. I think that an owner of a bar has the right to throw you out and forbid you from coming in there if you act in a disorderly manner. But you don't any more than you have a right to tell somebody who is black or any other color that they can't walk into a bar. You don't discriminate against somebody because of where they come. I don't like that. I don't agree with that. And I would appreciate it if you wanted to come into my office and chat with me. You tell me the bars that you're talking about, not now, but you come in and we'll talk about that. I don't like that. Let's get back to the drinking age in general. Yeah.
So something else that you might want to use with your fight for the Pro 18 is there's more subtle ways. I mean, you shouldn't underestimate the power of the youth. I came from a state that was 21, and it wasn't feasible to go to any other state, less. But I still got alcohol in high school at 17, 18. The kids are either going to go to people that our age to get it,
Right.
or there's going to be a bar, or there's going to be a liquor store somewhere that is out to make a dollar and will sell it.
Precisely.
And what you're doing is you're complicating the problem in two ways. One, you're forcing the youth to go around the law, which is not a good teaching. To me, I don't think it's something good to teach, to try to get around the law. Another is if I can go 2 miles to the corner 7-Eleven and buy a 6-pack of beer, isn't that have a lot less chance of having a wreck, drinking, driving, as opposed to me going 60 miles, 70 miles to get that?
I think you're absolutely right. And I think you quoted half the statement that I made last week. I mean, one of the concerns that I have is disrespect for the law. If you've studied American history, you know what happened in the 20s and 30s regarding prohibition. The national government felt it was in the best interest of the country to prevent anybody from drinking. So what you have, of course, is what do they call those places? Speakeasies, right. And you've had a tremendous economy, Al Capone and his friends, based on disrespect to the law. And I think if you're going to ask people to respect the law, if the city of Burlington makes a law, we want you to respect it even though you don't agree with all the things. But if we become very discriminatory and very arbitrary and say, you can't drink at 20, you can drink at 22, I think the kid at 20 is likely to drink and develop a certain contempt for law in general. So it's an issue that I feel very strongly about. Vermont is up in the air. It's even money as to which way it will go. I am going to have to run in 1 minute. Let me take one more question and I will be gone. Yes?
Do you feel that get a lot of cash? It's the only thing I really suck because I know bars are a major contributor, and the people I see in there are all 18, 19.
Yeah. The answer is yes. Many of the bars and restaurants will suffer, but that to me is really, quite frankly, not the major issue. We don't get at this moment, I hope we will shortly, by the way, a tax that affects the bars anyhow. They can make millions of dollars in the city of Burlington at this moment. We hope to change that. It does not get a penny, so it doesn't affect us. It affects the state, as a matter of fact. But that really is not the issue, and I would be a hypocrite if I told you that was the issue. The issue is, to me, I think basically Merritt pointed out one of the aspects of it. It's a question of fairness. You have a problem. And this is what I want you, maybe I'll leave with these parting words. Whether it has to do with war or peace, whether the issue of drinking. We have human beings like Mr. Gaddafi in the world. You have problems like people who drink while they're, drive while they're drinking. Okay? You have problems, and everyone says this is a problem. What I ask you to figure out is how do you solve these problems in a rational manner? All right? I think world peace And lowering of military budgets all over the world is the most important thing that can happen. And what I don't want you to do is just because there are problems that pop up, say, no, we can't move in that direction. Similarly, in a more practical sense, drunk driving is a real problem. The question is, how do you as a society address the problem? I think there are a number of ways. Through education, making people aware that it's not hip or cool to drink. Severe penalties. You want to drink and you're caught drinking and driving, fine. You lose your license for a year, or for 2 years, or for whatever. You may go to jail for a weekend. That's true whether you're 19 or whether you're 80 years of age. That's the way you deal with the problem. You don't simply selectively say, let's pick on this group of people. Okay, I have enjoyed the discussion very, very much, as I always do. I wish you the very best of luck in your future endeavors, and look forward to seeing you again. Thank you very much.